Welcome to the overview for the ALM Boss Bow Tie. You'll see it in the video next to a couple of my most used modules, the Beast Chalkboard Octave Switcher and Pamela's Workout, which I'm using in Euclidean mode most of the time. Be sure to check those two modules out as well. The Boss Bow Tie is an 8-step switch that's either 1 input to 8 outputs or 8 inputs to 1 output. Instead of being based on clocks and triggers or a sequential style switching, each stage is CV addressable with an onboard offset and a tenuverter, and there's also a gate input which is normaled high when no input is present, but plugging in a cable, gate, trigger or clock source, you can use this to open up the output on the module, creating further variation within a patch. I've got 8 outputs coming from a live wire AFG going into the 8 stages on the ALM Boss Bow Tie, which will then come out of a single output. Rather than the switch being clocked sequentially, this switch is CV addressable. So I'll start by looking at the onboard offset. Here's a triangle wave LFO and changing the attenuverter for the CV level. So we can address the 8 steps on the switch with the offsets and the CV input. Let's move from a triangle wave to a square wave. And you can see that just bounces between the first and last step. Here's a ramp wave. Now a saw. Going back to a triangle wave, here's some faster LFO rates. Here's a sample and hold into the CV, and that random voltage will address those 8 steps randomly. You can scale it back and change the offset and the CV controls with the attenuverter, meaning you can also invert your incoming CV to address the steps as well. This time, instead of routing 8 different inputs from the switch to a single output, I'm going to route a single input to 8 different outputs, and these are all going to different parameters within my patch. Some of these modulations are more subtle than others. Here's a triangle wave LFO into the CV to control the steps, and you can see the rate of that LED on the cable. And using a sample and hold output instead, we can see that CV changing between those steps randomly. So next thing to look at is the gate input, which elevates the possibilities and uses of the switch again. I've got 8 different random voltages from LFOs and different sample and hold outputs going to modulate both pitch and some timbre settings around my patch. Stepping through the steps on the switch using the onboard offset, you can hear what each input is doing. Taking a saw wave into the CV input, this will then step through the 8 switch inputs. gate input on the module is normal to be high until an input is present, and plugging in a cable will break that normalizing, which will stop the output passing through. Adding a gate or a high voltage will then open up that output again. You can see when the cable goes red, the gate is high and the steps are passing through the switch. So the particular patch I've got set up is a bit of random nonsense with pitch firing off all over the place, but sending this modulation to pitch helps you easily hear what's going on with the patch. Here I've got a constant offset going into the input, and I've got 8 outputs going to trigger 8 different percussion sounds. Usually you'd need a gate, trigger or clock to trigger drums rather than a constant offset, but this constant offset will have a hard rising edge at that single stage output, like a gate or a trigger when it moves to the new step output on the boss bow tie. So here's an LFO for CV addressing of those steps. You can hear this change which drums are being triggered. Here's a ramp wave instead of a saw wave LFO. Here's a square, a little bit faster as well. Here's a triangle going back and forth. And I'll move to sample and hold. So the sample and hold gives us randomly CV addressed switching, creating the drum sequence. Taking out the sample and hold and using a sequencer's output, we can change the different sequencer step outputs to match the certain stages on the switch to sequence new patterns with this switch as well. If I start to turn the sequencer steps down, you'll hear this change, and then I'll build a sequence back up to create a new drum rhythm. I have a kick and a hi-hat sound triggered from Pamela's workout in Euclidean mode, and I've got other trigger variations going into the boss bow tie to send those percussion sounds out through the different stages on the switch to trigger this percussion alongside the kick and hi-hat. Plugging in the bottom cable, which is going to be a sample and hold modulation to the CV input, we can use that to address those steps and change those trigger rhythms. So the unit is also great for triggers, gates and clocks and anything along that side of things, not just CV and audio. Another idea and possible use for the switch would be to use different voltage offsets going into the 8 steps on the switch, and then taking the output to a quantizer and using CV to address that switch to create a CV addressable sequencer. The boss bow tie is a great switch module which offers functions beyond basic switches or sequential switches, with a CV addressing of those stages and the gate input allowing you to create more complex switching within a patch. Check out the other videos on my channel, hit like and subscribe, and if you want to support the videos in general, check the Patreon link in the description.